Hello!
Old computers, then! And I mean really old computers, like from 30 plus years ago. That's not a computer, obviously, it's a joystick. It's representational. As you may have gathered from the content on this channel, I like old computers perhaps a little bit too much. As you know, I've written 2 books about terrible old games that gave me the excuse to buy a load of vintage computers, because, you see, some people might say, "Ah, this game is okay actually, it just doesn't work properly on emulators," and then I can counter by saying, "No, I have played it on an actual machine and it is still a load of poo." Well, that's my excuse for buying so many, and I am sticking to it. This thing's getting on my nerves now, I'm going to get rid of it. Anyway, in this video I'm going to show you 8 vintage computers that I own and test games on. But before that, an advert bit. For this video has been kindly sponsored by an app called Snups. That's how you spell it. Now, here at Ashens HQ we get a lot of sponsorship requests from various apps, and to be honest we ignore pretty much all of them, as the apps aren't in any way relevant to the channel. But my goodness, I actually needed this app myself, right? The idea behind Snups is that you can catalogue and organise collections of things you own, a bit like those photo apps the kids all use, but with a point. And you can share your collections via the app and look at what others are sharing and set up groups for like-minded people and all that stuff. Now, I needed this partially because I'm nosy and wanted to see what other people have got, I'll be honest there, but mostly because I really want a record of the collectible stuff I have, because having a photographic record of things is super useful for insurance purposes in case something awful happens to your things, or someone nicks them all, or whatever. Then I realised we could basically have a worldwide group of people finding interesting items and weird tat and sharing it with each other, and I got all excited. So, here's how the Snups app works. Look, here's my phone with the app on, and there I am at Ashens. Do be sure to follow me if you get the app. So, the way this works is, it organises things by shelves, and a shelf is a group of similar items, basically, that you put together yourself. I have so far set up a few. I am populating them at the moment, so some of them are still private and that. I've got knockoffs, tat, consoles, vintage computers. Yep, spoilers there for the rest of the video. Action figures I've started as well, handhelds, I've got a lot of those, and Sega Saturn stuff, because I'm kind of obsessed with that at the moment. Anyway, let us add something and it will give you an idea of how it works, because it's dead easy. Like, right, we want to add the first knockoff. Press the add button. And already we're into the photo thing where you can take a square photo of it. I'm going to add a game child, because this isn't the first thing in the knockoffs category. I'm doing something wrong with my life. And let's put it up there like that. Take the photo. That angle, I reckon. Clunk, click every trip, and there you are. You have captured one item, add another, or tap arrow. Nope, this will do for the time being, so we'll tap the arrow, and there it is. You can put in the item title, which is going to be, as you can probably guess, Game Child. That was easy. And I'm putting a brief description. It's on the knockoff shelf, as we said earlier. I'm going to say, probably the most infamous of all the Game Boy... Oop, need a space in Game Boy. Game Boy knockoffs. There we are. That was nice and easy. I'm going to hyphenate knockoffs, actually, because I did in the title of the shelf, and that would be naughty not to. There we are. Return. Actually, I'm going to remove that return. We don't need that, because we are done. You can put additional images on and some more details of things if you like year of release, I find is quite a good detail. If you could ever work out exactly what year a Game Child was released, well, good luck to you, frankly. And there we are. You can now look in the shelf, and there it is, your item for all the world to see. Also, there's this really handy eBay button. If you ever want to sell something, you can literally send it straight to eBay, which I quite like the simplicity of that. But yeah, you can look around and see what other people are doing. Somebody called Treasure Hunter is following me on 4th of October, which is a bit scary because I haven't publicised it at this stage, so that's a bit weird. I wonder who it is. I hope it is not a murderer. Here's all my stuff which you saw earlier, and I follow various people looking for video game stuff and that. Look, somebody's got a Game Boy Color Pokemon Krytle there, which I presume they mean Crystal. That's Ryan Starks. Sort your spelling, Ryan, but we're impressed with your Game Boy. I like these things. Oh god, here's some the Black Series stuff. That's interesting. Phasma, all fairly standard there. Is that the later Vader? Because the early Vader... No, no! Enough! I'm getting into that too much. Oh God, while I think about it, the app is free to download and there are no in-app purchases. It is completely free, which is another reason I like it, frankly. So I'm going to be cataloguing all sorts of stuff on there, so give me a follow. As I said, I'm at Ashens on the app, as you would expect. And most importantly, join the group, which is called The Brown Sofa, and upload anything of interest you may have. We're interested in retro computing stuff, old toys, odd food, most importantly, of course, weird tat. Join us! Anyway, let us begin looking at vintage computers. Let us start with a computer I had in the early 80s. Well, not specifically this model, but this is a Sinclair ZX Spectrum released in 1982. It has a Zilog Z80A CPU clocked in at 3.5 megahertz. Don't get too excited by the megahertz rating. With these early 80s machines, custom chips and stuff tend to make more of a difference in the clock rating, really. And of course it has 48k of RAM, although it was preceded by a 16k version, and it's a tiny little thing. And I tell you what, they didn't actually look like this. This one I had was knackered. The keyboard membrane had gone and all the front of it was damaged, so I bought a replacement in white and black keys to make it look a bit different. So generally they do not look like this. This part is black, these keys are a sort of weird aquamarine-y colour. I did make a mistake though gluing it on. I used a fairly standard glue that I thought would be effective, and it was effective, but it also ate into the plastic when it came up at the top, which was a slight worry, but hey, it survives and it works. On the back you've got your expansion ports, you've got 9 volts direct current going in, microphone and ear, which sound exciting and musical, but are actually just for connecting the tape deck, and your TV out there. It was a very basic machine, the old Spectrum. It was very cheap, and that's why it was so popular. And even by today's standards, it does feel very, very small. Now, the Zilog Z80A processor in this was mass-produced for very, very low sums, and so features in a whole slew of early computers and various other devices. I mean, it runs Sega Master System had one, Game Gear had one. Hell, there's actually one inside the Mega Drive, although it's not like the main processing unit. It's in there as a sort of co-processor. I think it controls some of the audio, if I remember anyway. But, the memories of the Spectrum and its weird blocky colour schemes, and goodness knows. And I tell you what, one of the good games for it looked like this. The year is 1982 and the world gives birth to the Commodore 64. I believe the best-selling 8-bit computer that ever there was. It's got an MOS 6510 processor clocked in at 1 megahertz and 64k of RAM, as you would expect from something called a Commodore 64. This is an early bread bin design, as they refer to it. There was a Commodore 64C which came out later. Need to give this one a clean, but I got this in terrible condition. You can see there's still a lot of scratches, things. There were keys missing. The 4 key and the springs were completely missing full stop, actually, which is why the 4 is a much lighter colour than the rest of it. I had to buy one off eBay in America. Couldn't find any locally, which is kind of ridiculous considering how many of these things sold with their crazy function keys on the side. But yeah, the Commodore 64 was very much an 80s mainstay and hugely popular in the UK. It was this versus the ZX Spectrum in the playground, generally with a few Amstrad owners bringing up the rear, so to speak. The keyboard is remarkably good for 1982. I mean, you wouldn't want to type out any particularly long theses on it, but it's not at all bad. It's springy and you can type on it and it doesn't hurt your fingers, which frankly, from early 80s keyboards, is a miracle. Ports. You've got control port 1 and control port 2, your standard 9-pin joystick connectors of the time. You have an on button, that's useful. Your power goes in there. Here's a cartridge port at the back. Yes, there were some games released on cartridge. I can't remember what that does. That's a little variable resistor or rheostat or something or other. I don't know what fiddling with that does, but that connects to the television, obviously your RF out. You've got an expansion port of some type and another. Couldn't tell you what they do off the top of my head. I would imagine one is probably for the old data cassette loader. I don't have it handy to check, which is annoying. And one's for a monitor, isn't it, one imagines. And you've got a couple of cartridge ports at the back if you enjoy that kind of thing. Nothing on this side at all. I didn't have a Commodore 64 back in the day, but when I had to get one for the book, I knew I would have to go for the classic bread bin design. I didn't want to spend much money and got a really smacked up one, as you can see. But it does work perfectly and has loaded in all the games and that kind of stuff. I generally use a really nice adapter thing I've got, which loads the cards off, loads the games off an SD card, which I find an awful lot quicker than an old tape deck. Anyway, one of the best Commodore 64 games was this. So here's a long one then. I think this was Alan Sugar's best-selling of the standard home computers, the Amstrad CPC464. Released in 1984, has a Zilog Z80A CPU, clocked in at 4 MHz, I believe, and has 64 megabytes of RAM, as the 64 there would imply. And as you can see, they've done Amstrad's often used trick of having a built-in tape deck, something they carried over to the ZX Spectrum when they bought it out and released the Spectrum Plus 2 and the Spectrum Plus 3. This has a copy of The Galactic Plague in it, which is a truly, truly awful Amsoft game, as many of the Amsoft games were. Here it is. Let's pretend we never saw it. It's also got a tape counter, which they omitted when they did the Spectrum Plus 2, which is always a shame, I thought. It's got a big old numerical keypad for, well, business usage. You've got your cursor keys with an inexplicable copy key in the middle, and your full-on keyboard the other side. And it's a pretty damn good keyboard as well. The Amstrad was an interesting machine, had all sorts of weird video modes that were generally not used that well, because it was a bit of a pain to program for, I think, ultimately. But I tell you what, when they got games right on the Amstrad, my goodness, they were impressive for the time, to say the least. On the back of it we have monitor. That'll be for monitors and more sort of better than television output stuff. Your 5V DC in, floppy disk connector, your printer connector, user ports. That is basically what I would term as the joystick port, and some sort of icon. I can't think what that does off the top of my head. That's annoying. But yeah, you could also buy them with monitors, some of which were green screen, so they only showed shades of grey, which is a really boring way to look at games which are supposed to be in colour. But yeah, it's a solid machine. This one's knocked about a bit, but I never had an Amstrad back in the day. And it really is knocked about a bit, actually. I mean, you can spot the old damage to the shift key there. But it's an interesting one. Incidentally, here's something of interest, particularly for the American audience. As I said earlier, some of these came with built-in disk drives and other models and stuff like that. But the disk drives weren't the standard 3.5-inch discs, which we know of. They were 3-inch discs, which look like that. Little metal protector and all the spinning gubbins inside. Tragically, this is a copy of Clax, but don't hold that against it. Anyway, one of the best games for the CPC464 was this. It's a Tangerine Oric. Tangerine being the company that made it, not the name of it. Specifically, an Oric Atmos, a 48K version. So, this was released in 1984 and has an MOS 6502 processor clocked in at 1 MHz, very, very similar to the Commodore 64 on that front. And it was very, very, in fact, super popular in France, but not really anywhere else. So this is an upgraded version of an Oric 1, which was their first computer, and really, it's pretty much the same. You've got a bit more RAM, and technically that's kind of it. They updated the ROM, the actual controlling software of it, because there were various bugs in the original which caused problems. But unfortunately, they failed to address one of the most annoying bugs, which was that there was an error-checking problem with the routine that loaded games in from tape. So often it would completely fail to load games. And they didn't fix it at all, so this still has the same problem. The biggest upgrade between the Atmos and the Oric 1, though, was the keyboard. This has actually quite a nice keyboard. Not a terrific amount of keys, it must be said, but it is only a little old thing. And yeah, they're quite springy and all work and all that kind of stuff, whereas the Oric 1 had this grotesque, horrible sub-calculator chiclet keyboard, which made, well, frankly, using it an absolute pain. Just like to point out, I've always hated the placement of these cursor keys. So, connectors, not a lot for this one, really. You've got your UHF or RF output for your television. You've got RGB for a monitor. You've got your tape connector there. Printer port, expansion port, and power. And they're all on the back. And your speakers underneath. Look, there it is, being all speakery. I always like the design of this. Nice machine. And you don't hear of it very often these days, which is a bit of a shame. One of the best games for it looks like this. The Acorn Electron, basically a cut-down BBC Micro, if you've ever heard of one of those, a budget model, if you will. Released in 1983, has an MOS 6502A processor, clocked in at 2 MHz, and 32 megabytes of RAM. And quite a nice keyboard for the time. Very click-clacky, but for a budget machine, you can't complain. Really do need to give these keys a clean, though. Never get round to it. Too busy, well, testing crap games on them, really. That's what I do. The machine itself still has a fair amount of ports on it. You've got on the bottom here UHF TV, or the RF port as we call it. You've got next to it, it's composite output, I believe, the video there. There's an RGB for your monitors and stuff. There's your tape deck at the side. And on the back, a very, very large connector with this useful rather nice protector on it. You don't see those very often. For connecting various peripherals and disk drives and goodness knows what, and hoping to turn it mostly into a BBC Micro and never quite working. And that's where the power goes in. Interesting machines, these. They run a little bit slow in the BBC Micro, if I recall, but otherwise they are pretty similar, but do lack some of the bells and whistles, particularly in sound. I think, if I recall, these can only make monophonic sound, whereas you had like 3 channels on a full-on BBC Micro, and generally you would load the games in off tape, as with all these things. I'm going to show you one of the floppy disks, though, in case you're young and never seen one. That's, I can't recall. They must have made a disk drive for the Electron. I don't recall it, but the BBC Micro certainly would use these massive, big old floppy disks. If you're wondering why they come in a protector, it's because that's the actual surface of the disk. There's nothing protecting it. If you want to see what a good game on the Acorn Electron looked like, here's one. It's an MSX, specifically made by Toshiba, a 64K model, the HX10, released in 1984 with the old Zilog Z80A CPU clocking in at 3.6 MHz. So, if you've never heard of the MSX, it was something that, well, as this sticker implies, was quite big in Japan, although I think the HX10 was probably the biggest selling one in the UK. So, it's kind of a computing standard from Microsoft, if I recall, for early computers, and loads of different manufacturers made them. It was kind of the de facto game standard in Japan before the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System. So there's a lot of stuff out there, a lot of games on cartridge, and that goes in the slot on this one. Quite a nice keyboard for the time. It's very flat. It needs to be sort of raised slightly to actually be useful, but it has a massive red button on it marked STOP, which I do love very much. Connectors you have here. Your joystick ports, the standard old 9 pins that you got on these things. An interesting printer port with clips on it. They do like their clips on this. There's one on the expansion bus as well, and a little protector screwed onto it. Video, audio, RF, depending on what you're connecting it to. Cassette recorder goes on there. Caution, to prevent electric shock, do not remove cover. Okay, I won't do that then. And on this side, a power switch, always useful. This is a nice MSX. To be honest, the MSXs were always pretty well made. This is one of my favourite ones. I would, of course, like a Sony Hitbit. The Sony Hitbit being like the very best of the MSXs made. Well, as long as you're not counting MSX2s, the upgraded models, but there were piss all software ever really produced for those, so not too worried about that. If I remember rightly, I bought this from the London gaming market. I think the first time they had it. Or it was the first time I knew of them having it anyway. And if you want to see what an MSX game looks like that is pretty good, look at this one. The Atari XEGS, or XE Game System, or XEGS as we usually refer to it as. So it was released in 1987, but is actually a repackaged Atari 65 XE, which was released in 1985. Processor is an MOS 6502C. I do not know what megahertz that is clocked at. I would guess somewhere around 1.8, they usually were. 64K of RAM, and all the usual gubbins. Now, this is interesting because it's technically a games console. Basically, they took the 65 XE, which was one of the last of Atari's 8-bit range of computers, and stuck it in a console shell. And the idea was you could buy it and you'd have a joystick and you could plug your cartridges, such as Bug Hunt here, into the top and play games in it. But then you could also buy a keyboard that plugs in, you see. You could buy there was a big set of it you could buy which came with a keyboard and the joystick and games, etc. It had a light gun as well, I think. Came with a tape deck as well, if I remember. Or you could just buy the cheaper box on its own. I think Atari's idea was to sort of have this halfway house between a computer and a console. But it is literally a computer with other bits you can add to make it the full thing. I always enjoyed the slightly bizarre design of it. You can tell where the Atari ST was coming along, because you've got the mighty washboard slots in order to fit in with it artistically. You've got your buttons that look like somebody's thrown a load of weird sweets on the top of it. Always a favourite, that. And interestingly, it has a built-in game, which is a rarity for such things. It's got the old Atari version of Missile Command. I forget how you start it up now. I think you hold down Select or something when you turn it on. So, ports we have at the side here, 2 joystick ports. We have at the back, as expected, audio out, composite out, I think, there for monitor, your RF out for your television. You've got your peripheral slot and your power. Obviously, there's your big cartridge on the top. And round this side where you plug your keyboard in. And got to say, keyboard's pretty horrible. It looks pretty swish, but horrible, super soft, spongy keys. Really nasty to type on. Still, I was going to say not bad by early 80s standards, but hey, this came out in 1987, so there's no excuse. Anyway, this would play any of Atari's 8-bit games, I think, from right early machines onwards, and one of the best games for it looks like this. It's the Dragon 32, the Welsh microcomputer. Released in 1982, it has 32 megabytes of RAM, as that implies. There was a later 64 megabyte model. But interestingly, clocked in at 0.89 megahertz, there's a Motorola 6809E processor, which is more powerful and versatile than any of the other computers shown are using. But sadly, this does fall down quite a lot in graphics modes and custom chips and stuff, so the games were not impressive, to say the least, as compared to the others as a general rule. But not as bad as people claim. I always think the Dragon 32 is a bit underrated, frankly. So, clicky buttons, and not bad at all keyboard for 1982. Again, not particularly enamoured of the cursor keys, but I do like the old Dragon 32. It's a very chunky thing as well, very large, although very light, because there's not really a whole lot inside it, actually. Kind of opening up, you feel like they could have perhaps put it in something smaller, but they didn't. So, expansion port stroke cartridgey thing on the side, quite deep in there. You've got your trans supply, which is where the power supply goes in, if I recall correctly. I'm looking over to where the power supply is. Nope, I've taken it upstairs. Never mind. I'll just look at the on-off button instead. There's the monitor, if you have such a thing that connects. TV, if you don't. There's a reset button, left and right joysticks, tape connector, and another expansion port there. Here's an interesting thing, the old Dragon 32. And also, it's technically extremely similar to the Tandy TRS-80, if you ever encountered one of those, to the extent that quite a lot of the software is cross-compatible, which I did not know until recently. But I tell you something I did know, this was a good game for the Dragon 32. So there you go, there were 8 vintage microcomputers, as we used to say very, very much back in the day, that I have collected over the years. And I've got more. Look, here's a BBC Master, there's an Amstrad CPC464, it's got that floppy drive built in I was talking about. Anyway, if you want to see pictures of all these things and plenty more, have a look on the old Snups profile like I said earlier. There's links below and all that gubbins. Anyway, I'm off to play some games. Bye.
Subscribe for more.